A trust fund junkie falls for his shrink's daughter, sparking a forbidden romance. But his wealthy friends turn against him, plotting to sabotage both his treatment and his new love. One afternoon in Manhattan, New York, Daniel Topler, the son of a rich businessman, takes a few pills to ease his nerves and climbs over Martha Bridge. He lets himself fall freely in an attempt to end his life when Officer Franklin stops him. The cop drags him to court, where he explains to Judge Carmel that he was simply taking a stroll when the police showed up and manhandled him, ruining his expensive designer clothing. However, he's willing to drop all charges against the law enforcer if they release him. Instead, the prosecutor sentences him to undergo treatment since he's hooked to substances and has been appearing in hearings more frequently. Unfortunately, Dan is disoriented and unable to concentrate on his ruling, silently suffering from the effects of the medications he's taken. His vision slowly dims during the proceedings, and he eventually faints. He wakes up at the Live Free or Die mental health facility with a straitjacket on. Dr. Jacob Bernstein introduces himself, but Daniel refuses to cooperate. The bachelor tries to escape from his restraints, so Nurse Linda walks in and sedates him. Elaine, his father's mistress, visits the next day to wake him from a long sleep. The attending psychiatrist arrives shortly and finds his room furnished with personal items from his loft. He's amused that his new patient reads On Becoming a Person, a work by renowned psychologist Carl Rogers. Dan isn't interested in their casual conversation and checks the pills stashed in one of his books, but he soon learns that the bottle has been emptied. In spite of the frustrating discovery, the man continues to get dressed and prepares to leave. When Jacob hints about calling the nurse, he finally sits down for a talk. His doctor explains that he has to join their senior men's group at Temple B'nai Israel every Sunday evening. He already discussed it with Daniel's father, who thinks it's a good idea, although he has to stay at the clinic until his therapy is complete. When he refuses the plan, the psychiatrist calls the attendants and says he'll check back in a month. As he's being placed in a straitjacket, he quickly changes his mind and agrees to go. Jacob then reviews the house rules with his patient, who can drive his car to the temple every Sunday, though he isn't allowed to drink or use medications other than what he'll prescribe. Albert Topler, Dan's father, is surprised to get a call from his son, who begs him to take him out of that place. The old man insists it's for his own good, and drops the call to spend time with Elaine, unaware that she's conspiring with a hidden photographer. When his wife, Harriet Topler, receives photos of the affair, she calls her divorce attorney. The woman reassures her that with the evidence, they can leave her husband with nothing. Bruce, Daniel's wealthy associate, calls him that afternoon and convinces him to join tonight's ball, despite his hesitation. The bachelor slips past security that evening and walks to his friend's house for the party. There, he comes across the beautiful Charlotte Davidson, his mom's lawyer and a friend of Bruce. She's been wanting to meet him and forces him to drink, even though he admits he's currently recovering. Once he's intoxicated, she takes him to an upstairs room and unclothes him, but he vomits and passes out before they can make love. Back at the facility, the doctor gives Dan a final warning that if he breaks the rules one more time, he'll be sent to prison. Meanwhile, Charlie attends the burial of her father, Ganymede Davidson, leaving her an inheritance that generates $225 million per year. She encounters Barry Blackman, her dad's friend and professor of Greek and Roman history, and invites him to lunch on Wednesday. The estranged couple meet in the same week to negotiate their divorce after 30 years of marriage. Harriet's attorney presents evidence of the affair to Blinder, her husband's legal representative, and demands 90% of Albert's estate. When they fail to reach an agreement, they visit Daniel and offer him a position at their company, along with other incentives to help him stay clean. He scoffs at the idea and ridicules the nature of their business. Shocked by the disrespect, his mother sharply reminds him that his father's wealth keeps them comfortable. She implies he should be thankful because, unlike him, his dad didn't have a fortunate upbringing. Dan doesn't understand why they sent him to Yale University for college just to have him take over their family enterprise. When he confronts them about it, Albert explains they're only doing it so he would grow up to become a mature and responsible adult. Realizing they have failed as parents, the Toplers leave disappointed. Their son drives to the temple that night to meet with the senior men, just as the psychiatrist instructed him. At the meeting, Jacob introduces Daniel as a medical student who plans to specialize in gerontology. He gets acquainted with the group and learns about their interesting backgrounds. One by one, the men introduce themselves. Morty Mavis, a business consultant, Rob Vitrioff, a Wall Street trader, Tracy Auspitz, a former deputy administrator for the EPA, and Sam Botkin, whose computer program designed the Verrazano Bridge. The young man also meets Harry Rosenthal, a former musical director of the Metropolitan Opera, David, a PR man, and Barry, the same man that Charlie met at her dad's funeral. After the initial pleasantries, Dan listens closely as Rob and Morty talk about their estranged children. When their session concludes, he heads out to the parking lot, where he meets Laura, an aspiring novel writer, and is instantly captivated by her beauty. He soon discovers she's Jacob's daughter, who bids him goodbye and leaves with her father. Days later, Charlie and Barry go on a date as they grab snacks and share a meal by the bench. When he finds out that she's a divorce lawyer, he surmises that, like her father, she probably tries to reconcile couples before opting to end their marriage. However, the woman avoids the topic and excuses herself, though she agrees to meet with him again. At his office, the doctor prompts his patient to discuss his observations from last night, so he humors him with an answer and believes Rob is struggling with the loss of control over his son. Jacob knows that Daniel was taking pre-med at Yale University and inquires why he dropped out of school, but he responds vaguely and begins to doubt the fast-paced therapy. His psychiatrist implies it's because he had previously attempted to take his own life, and if he succeeds the second time, there's no taking it back. He then probes about his dark mood, but Dan sarcastically replies and says there's no reason for him to feel down because he's rich and has friends. Intent on understanding his patient, he reframes the question and asks why he tried ending his life. The doctor finally catches the young man's attention. He explains he lost all hope when he fell into the habit and was no longer fit to study, forcing him to drop out and waste his opportunity. Jacob reassures him isn't beyond redemption and reminds him to stick to his regimen during the weekend so he can begin pulling his life back together. Before leaving, he shares a quote from his mentor and close friend, Carl Rogers, and teaches him that he must learn to accept himself before he can change. Bruce calls Daniel later that week to tell him that Charlotte wants him to be there for next Saturday's bash. He agrees to go and requests his friend to get him Laura's phone number. At the senior men's group, the doctor reveals his fears about an upcoming surgery after specialists found tumors in his kidney. As soon as the meeting is over, Dan rushes to Laura at the parking lot and asks for her number, but she won't give it away. Jacob catches up to them and tells the young man to introduce himself to his daughter, so he comes clean and admits he's a patient of her father. He adds that he attends the meetings as part of his therapy, and that he isn't allowed to drink or take any unprescribed substance. His psychiatrist commends him for his honesty, but when he insists on getting her phone number, he tells him to stay away from his daughter. This doesn't stop Daniel from bettering himself, as he spends his free time exercising and reading. One day, Lars approaches him and introduces himself as a doctor at the facility. He tells the story of a patient who always shows up late for therapy as his way of regaining control. His madness unravels, and it becomes clear that the control freak he despises in the tale is actually him. Laura's father interrupts their exchange and accompanies the deranged man as he apologizes for being late. That afternoon, Jacob lets Dan take the Rorschach test to assess his personality, though he gives up when his patient relates every inkblot to intimate scenes or body parts. Meanwhile, Charlie and Barry excitedly prepare for a second date and meet at the lawyer's apartment. He teaches her how to use her father's telescope, but when they can no longer resist each other, their lips passionately meet. That evening, the wealthy bachelor reluctantly shows up at the party, though he changes his mind when his friends surprise him with the presence of beautiful women. He initially enjoys their company as they playfully strap him to a cross, but his mood turns sour the moment they start forcing him to drink. Just then, Laura arrives with Charlotte and notices that Dan is distressed. Knowing he isn't supposed to imbibe, she devises a plan to rescue him. She removes her blouse and moves in for a kiss, then teases him for a while before freeing him from his bonds. They continue their passionate exchange at Live Free or Die. He briefly interrupts their moment to thank her for saving his life, then takes her into his room to make love. The following morning, their fathers walk in on the couple, surprised to find them asleep and cuddling in the bed. Laura quickly gets dressed, and as soon as she walks out, Jacob pulls her close and sternly warns her not to see Daniel again. She calls her sweetheart later that day to apologize for the incident, afraid that her dad would send him to prison. The man thinks it's unlikely since it wouldn't be professional, and they both agree to meet that night against the doctor's wishes. At a cafe, Charlie accuses her friend of stealing Dan from her, but says she can have him now that she's preoccupied with someone else. However, when she learns that Laura will be attending more parties with the group, she stops her from going. The writer thinks she's just jealous and doesn't want her to be around him, since the lawyer has been obsessing about him. She storms out to visit her lover and ask about their relationship, but when Daniel sees Lars stalking a fellow guest, he excuses himself to confront the old man. The patient rebukes the bachelor to mind his own business and insists that he really is a psychoanalyst. Helen, a staff at Live Free or Die, confirms this and says he used to be a chief psychiatrist at Bellevue. That week, at the meeting, Jacob shares that his duties as a doctor helped him overcome his fear of the upcoming surgery. He volunteers Dan to lead their discussions while he recovers, then asks him to take over and discuss issues with their mental health. The youngest of the group reveals that life isn't easy despite his age. He forces himself to get out of bed and not be consumed by negative thoughts as he finds a reason to continue living. Soon, the other men talk about their struggles and use humor to lift their spirits. After the session, Daniel shows up at Bruce's party to confront him regarding last Saturday's events. The rich bachelor believes his friend set up the ball to ridicule him in front of Laura, who wasn't supposed to be there. He thinks he's a traitor for trying to force him to drink, despite knowing that he's in treatment and isn't allowed to imbibe. Bruce doesn't deny the allegations and spitefully tells him that his lover is upstairs, indulging in illicit substances and spending the evening with someone else. Dan immediately comes up to the room and throws her partner outside the window into the pool. The woman tempts him to join her in bed, but the man instructs her to get dressed so they can leave together. Once they're alone at her home, he admits that he's fond of her and hints on having deeper feelings before they make love. The next day, he finds out from Helen that Jacob was rushed to the hospital, so he asks Dr. Heine, the new replacement, for his car keys so he can pay him a visit. The psychiatrist refuses and adds that his weekend visits to the temple are no longer included in his treatment. Daniel escapes from the facility and walks to Bruce's home to make amends for his recent behavior. He then requests his friend to lend him a car and some money to see his psychiatrist. On his way, Charlie calls and tells him to drop by her place. The moment he arrives, he pulls her into the privacy of her apartment for a passionate exchange, then throws him out to the hall. She then visits Barry in the middle of the night, wanting to make love, but the man rejects her advances and takes her to a room so she can be alone until morning. By the time Dan reaches the hospital, Laura is already aware of his encounter with her friend and calls security on him. The following morning, Charlotte decides she wants to move into her lover's home. When she and her client meet with Albert and Blinder later that day, she announces that she's changed her law practice to mediation, and that she'll instead try to bring the couple together. Harriet confesses to her husband that she never wanted a divorce or his money, and that she was just trying to teach him a lesson. Mr. Topler apologizes for hurting her, and says she's the only one he ever loved, vowing to never look at other women again. Meanwhile, Daniel confronts Laura when he sees her waiting outside his room at Live Free or Die. She playfully strikes him, causing the man to fall to the ground. He pulls her close to kiss and implies his desire to be in a committed relationship, but she doesn't want to disobey her dad and expresses it might be their last day together. Shortly after the couple take off, Morty unexpectedly arrives at the scene. He eventually comes across Elaine, the woman that Dan wanted him to consider dating when they last talked. The athletic director, realizing the man was both wealthy and single, readily agrees to meeting him that weekend for tennis lessons. That evening, the young Topler leads the senior group and tells them he's not a medical student, but Jacob's patient. However, they take his admittance lightly and reveal they've always known. Wanting to get to know him, the men curiously ask about his relationship with Laura. He doesn't hide the fact that she's his girlfriend or that he's in love with her. When he shares more personal details about how they got together, Barry realizes that he's referring to Charlotte in his story, and that she had a passionate exchange with the man. Heartbroken, he walks home ahead of everyone to confront his girlfriend. The woman says she's a different person now, but the professor continues to break up and leaves her in tears. After the meeting, Laura drives her boyfriend back to the mental health facility, where Dr. Heine is waiting. He orders the attendants to place him in a straitjacket and announces that he's being sent to prison for leaving the premises against his orders. The lovebirds escape and head to the hospital, where Daniel wastes no time and requests Jacob for his daughter's hand in marriage. She initially refuses to marry him, believing he's a junkie with no direction in life. But her father comes to his defense and approvingly declares his positive virtues. He commends his patient for staying clean, for successfully leading their group, and for finding Morty a girlfriend so he won't feel lonely anymore. He also congratulates the bachelor for returning to medical school. Given how much progress he's made, the psychiatrist signs his release papers, freeing him from the court's jurisdiction. Jacob then asks Laura if she still has any objections on marrying Dan. She responds that she doesn't have any, and the couple share a romantic kiss. Sometime later, Charlotte unexpectedly appears at Barry's lecture and takes over. He says he was stupid to leave her, and she agrees. But then she proposes to him in front of the class. The professor doesn't say a word, and meets her lips with his to say yes. Meanwhile, Daniel and Laura tie the knot in a beachside wedding, with their families by their side.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.